Welcome to Polaris. A couple of housekeeping items right before we get started. Q&A, this is a big Q&A today with Dr. Monica Gandhi. So please, if you have questions, go into the chat box and let us know, and I will try to include them into our conversation together. Number two, audio settings. You can configure them on the bottom left of your Zoom screen if you need to change those. You can tweet us at AnyRoad or hashtag Polaris by AnyRoad today. And lastly, we are recording this, so you can always reference back, but anything that we include will be recorded and shared on our website. Wonderful. And right before we get started, welcome to Polaris by AnyRoad. Polaris is a series of interviews of leaders, business executives, and founders on how to build impactful, lasting relationships with consumers. I'm Daniel Yaffe, the Chief Operating Officer and co-founder here at AnyRoad. And for those of you who are less familiar, founded in 2012, we're an experiential data platform for brands to scale and optimize customer experiences that change behavior. Brands like Anheuser-Busch, Michaels, Honda, Dick's Sporting Goods all count on AnyRoad for everything from activations to tours, in-store services to classes. If your brand is investing in experiential, please check out our website at anyroad.com or reach out to talk to us. Our guest today is Dr. Monica Gandhi, an award-winning infectious disease doctor and professor at UCSF. Dr. Gandhi, welcome. I think you're muted, actually.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
No worries.
Hi.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're very excited to have you today. I know a lot of folks have a lot of questions for you and for what's going on in the world right now and the state of everything. So I'd love it if you can just take the first minute or two and just tell us a little bit more about your background as an infectious disease doctor and professor.
Yes, so I am an infectious disease trained doctor, and I have been at UCSF actually since 1996. So I have been here a long time. I'm a professor of medicine, and the main things that I do when I'm not doing COVID, which I hope I can stop doing soon, I'm an HIV doctor. So I'm the director of our big HIV clinic called Ward 86, which is actually the oldest clinic in the country. And then I also am this director of the Center for AIDS Research, which is an NIH funded initiative. So I got involved in COVID because I'm an ID doctor, and I'm happy to talk today about any questions because I think about COVID, unfortunately, all day long right now.
That I can only imagine. I'm actually going to start off with a question because it relates to your work as an HIV researcher, which is actually from Marianne. How do UCSF doctors who have experience with the HIV and AIDS epidemic take lessons learned and apply them to COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, I wish in a way that we had turned more to HIV doctors. And what I mean by that is I wrote a Newsweek article yesterday that said, I think HIV people helped this pandemic in 4 ways. One is that we have a sense of optimism because we knew that we got through HIV with antiretroviral therapy. And I think we would have had a little more optimistic messaging. Second is that we helped put forth the EUA process, the emergency use authorization. That was really something that came about in the FDA because of the pushing through of antiretroviral therapies through AIDS activism. And that helped these vaccines get EUA approval really quickly. The third is that we also pushed the NIH to do grant applications quickly for HIV, and that we saw in here. The fourth is that we have a very community-based approach to fighting pandemics, meaning activism. The communities who are affected by HIV are involved in our approaches. And I think, for example, with vaccine hesitancy, we should have more community-based involvement. Someone who just gets up there and stands up like a politician is not addressing necessarily the community. And then the last thing is, I wish we had had more harm reduction messaging, which we unfortunately didn't have. And what I mean by that is we had kind of a shame-based, fear-based approach. Like we acted as if everyone was equally at risk for COVID, untrue. That really, unfortunately, didn't help us with school closures. In some places, they're still closed. And that's not true. Children are not at risk for COVID at all to the same degree as adults and older people. There have been some young people under 40 who've died, but nowhere near those who are older. And we just sort of were not nuanced about our messaging and used a harm reduction approach. And that's why so many businesses were closed when we could have likely said, Okay, masks, distancing, ventilation work. We knew this from early on in the pandemic, and we could have opened more businesses with those three things until we got to the vaccines. And that's what I think we just went too far in our over caution.
Super interesting. Which brings me to my question of what is the state of the world right now? I mean, we're hearing everything day to day. I was just reading the news that the CDC recommends to hold off on Johnson & Johnson right now because of blood clots. Where are we? We've got Michigan on the one hand, we got global situation on the other. We're speeding along with vaccinations. I'm curious, from your vantage point, the 10,000-foot view, where does the world sit?
No, every day is just too confusing. I mean, the way that I put it in the United States in a very clean way is that there are 45 states who are actually doing great with COVID-19, literally great. And what I mean by that is their cases are low, their hospitalizations are low, and they're getting out the vaccine. Then there's Pennsylvania, Florida, Michigan, New Jersey, and New York that aren't doing as well, but only Michigan is the one where the cases and hospitalizations are the highest. And because of that, we have to have a more nuanced look. We're not in a fourth surge countrywide. We are, unfortunately, one state, I think likely because they never had a big surge with COVID, many other states did. So they don't have a lot of natural immunity. They kept pretty locked down. They had really small surges. So they didn't have a lot of natural immunity. And this is kind of when it's happening in Michigan, unfortunately. And then rolling out the vaccine has not been as fast in that state that I would really recommend surging vaccine there and just getting literally just 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, getting people's vaccines out. So we're not in a major terrible fourth surge in the country. It's localized. That's important to say. Number two is that these vaccines work, and these vaccines work incredibly well. So the way I would think about the world right now is I keep on thinking about us as sophomores in high school, and Israel are seniors in high school, and the UK are juniors. And so what I mean by that is Israel has 60%, almost 60% of their population first dose given. And that in that state, since March 8th, they've been wide open. Now, admittedly, they have more of this green pass mechanism where you can't come into certain restaurants unless you show that you have this vaccine passport. So they've adopted a different strategy than we, but their schools have been open and there is a lot more freedom and movement. UK is about 50% first dose given, and they chose a one first dose first strategy, which I hope will change to in the United States now that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is going to be on hold for a bit. We can talk about that later. And so they're at 50%. Yesterday was the first day that they really released lockdown. They have already opened their schools, no mask and distancing in schools. Schools are open, and they are doing great. Their cases are so low. So where are we going to get? Are we going to get there? Yes, we're going to get there. We have enough Pfizer. We have enough Moderna vaccine. Actually, it may delay when we get there a little bit if Johnson & Johnson's halted, and we can talk about that, but we will get there. We will get there by midsummer, and we are going to get through this pandemic, just like our two older, people in high school who are doing faster are getting through it. That's who we get to look to. We get to look to examples of where we're going to get to. On the other hand, we need more global vaccine equity, and we do need to work harder on the world getting vaccines. And that's another topic. And I can talk about Johnson & Johnson if that's helpful right now.
Yeah, well, I'm curious your thoughts on Johnson & Johnson. First, I don't know if people heard the news, and maybe you can just let us know a little bit more about it. I know this is hot off the press.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of all woke up this morning in a way in the United States to hearing that the FDA said, let's pause the Johnson & Johnson. And why they said that is there were 6 cases among 2.8 million people vaccinated in the United States who had a clot. And it was actually a severe clot. It was something in the brain, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis, it's called. And on the other hand, it was very rare. They were women, all women actually, and they were between the ages of 18 and 48. And this is a very rare side effect. It was 1 in 1.1 million doses, but the FDA said, we're going to pause we're not going to give it out right now, and we're going to have a meeting tomorrow where we talk about it. The ACIP is gathering tomorrow to talk about it on Wednesday. So the best news about it is it's very rare. The worst news about it is that it did pause the vaccine rollout with this vaccine, and I think that's fine. I mean, they could have actually done what the EU did with AstraZeneca vaccine, which is kind of in a similar family to Johnson and Johnson. And they also see clots with the AstraZeneca, but again, at a very low rate, about 1 in a million. And what they said in the EU is, since they were all occurring in younger groups, they've decided to keep on giving the AstraZeneca, but in the older populations. And that's what we could have done here, or we may do that tomorrow. So let's see what happens with what they decide. It is when something's in younger groups, it could, and they're all in women, it could be that we have to look at these 6 cases. Were these women on oral contraceptives? Were they more at risk for clotting disorders, for something else? They really do have to look into these cases before they decide to stop it for everyone. And I think what we're going to end up doing is likely saying, you know what, we're going to give it to older people and to men, but I don't think it's going to stop completely.
Yeah, no, that appreciate that context. I want to shift this conversation a little bit, because we've got a lot of people on this call who work for companies or brands that do in-store services or events or any kind of experiences. And we work with a lot of people on virtual and real life, but today it's all about real life, because that's what we're all curious about. So I'm curious, what needs to happen to get us back to normalcy as we know it, and then we'll get into what is normalcy. But you know, I think there are people, California I know is really at the forefront in opening up. I mean, I don't know forefront because a lot of states never really closed, but curious, in your eyes, what needs to happen to get back into in-person gatherings?
What needs to happen is as many people who are okay with it, please take the vaccine. And it's that simple. We have highly effective and incredible vaccines, and we need as many people who we can to get the vaccine, and we need to also give it to them. So California, April 15th is when they're opening it up to everyone 16 or older. I don't actually think this Johnson & Johnson halt is going to put that big of a dent, because only 4% of our doses were in Johnson & Johnson. We have a lot of Pfizer and Moderna here. And there are estimations that by June 15th, everyone will have gotten their second dose, which is why the governor put that date open on it and saying that we can go back to kind of almost real life. Now, he didn't say that we could release mask mandates, which aren't exactly real life, to have everyone masked. And we can talk about that in a minute, but I would say that his modeling is correct. That and so is Biden's, if he says that we can go back by mid-July. And if we have any place to look to, again, it's Israel and the UK, and they are going back to real life. Like, their schools are open, they're having outdoor sporting events, they are shoulder to shoulder in those outdoor sporting events. So just give it a little more time. I would say that by midsummer, early August, the United States is going to be back to normal. Now, what does normal mean? There are going to be places and companies that say, we still want to do that, masks. I will say that once everyone who has decided to get a vaccine can get a vaccine, I am not sure that any state or municipality can still keep a mask mandate. It doesn't mean that as an individual, someone won't decide, you know what, I don't even want a cold. I'm gonna wear a mask. And that, of course, is every individual's right. And actually, the SARS pandemic in East Asia, there were people who wore masks to this day. The issue is a mandate versus a non-mandate. And a mandate should only be kept on for a mask when people still can't get the vaccine, who want the vaccine. And that won't be true after a couple of months. And I think that President Biden's going to release the national mask mandate in the midsummer. And I think that California is going to release the state mask mandate in midsummer as well. And then people, again, will choose to wear masks. Companies will have to decide how normal they want to be. And what I mean by that is Salesforce yesterday said, okay, we're going to bring our vaccinated healthcare workers back, but it didn't, workers back. But they said it in my mind in a very abnormal way. They said, we're going to test twice a week. Now, if you're vaccinated, testing twice a week, given how low your rate of asymptomatic infection is, if I were advising Salesforce, I would not have said to test twice a week. I would have said, if you're unvaccinated, test. Yeah. And if you are vaccinated and you have symptoms, test. But to test every asymptomatic person who is vaccinated, you are going to be wasting a lot of money in your company by testing, in my opinion, and in my adjudicated ID opinion. So I wouldn't have done it in the way Salesforce said it. I think we need to decide that these vaccines work, which they do. And when we decide to open up, and every company, again, has the right to say, I want my workers vaccinated, or at least we're going to have a section for vaccinated, and this is going to be the section for unvaccinated, which are masked, distanced, and ventilated. But if they decide that that they're going to open up for vaccinated people, and they are going to actually ask them to show that they're vaccinated, and a company can do that, that section of the company can be normal. I mean, that's, even the CDC has said that unvaccinated people can hang out with vaccinated people without masks and distancing, because that's how effective these vaccines are.
Just a question on that, and then we can get to, there's a question coming in from Sue, which has to do with what can companies mandate, which is an interesting conversation. Yeah. Crosses the public health and probably political a bit. If I'm vaccinated, what are my risks? What are my risks, and what should I be doing right now, and what should I not be doing right now? And I guess more specifically in this transitionary period.
In the transitionary period, your risks are a little higher than in midsummer, which I think we're going to have such low cases. But I will tell you that a vaccinated person is 100% protected. 100%, not 99.9%. 100% protected from severe disease, from COVID-19 after they're vaccinated. There was an April 1st Pfizer press release looking at their first 6 months of data from 44,000 people around the world. People were masking, they weren't masking, they weren't all healthcare workers, they weren't all perfect. Everyone was just in around the world. And literally Pfizer, 100% efficacy against severe disease. And that's what all the clinical trials showed us as well. You are not going to land in the hospital with COVID-19 if you've had a vaccine, wow. Period. I mean, it's so weird to have like 100%. It's nothing in life usually is. And so because of that, I feel very safe as a vaccinated person doing whatever I want. Now, I do think there's a social contract to be made. And so I will still mask and distance in public because I don't know who's unvaccinated or who's not. However, I am also very unlikely to spread it to people when I'm vaccinated. There's data showing that between your rate of asymptomatic infection in your nose, getting it in your nose, is decreased by about 80 to 94%. Studies range between 80 to 94%. So I'm also very unlikely to transmit it. And again, as our cases go down low, we're going to be very low risk to even confront it around us. So San Francisco is a good example. About 5 people in the city got diagnosed yesterday with COVID out of a city of almost 1 million. I mean, it's very low prevalence out there. It's very hard for me to get COVID out there, even if I wasn't vaccinated. So you also have to think about your community incidents in your community, which is different in Florida, in Michigan right now, and your vaccination status. So I think vaccinated people, I feel very safe. And I've done this with my 87 and 80-year-old parents, taking them indoor dining. I would be happy for them to go to the gym. They both fully vaccinated. I feel very safe with them doing everything. But again, I think that because there's this mixed period, we have to be respectful of those who aren't vaccinated and polite and still wear our masks in a store. We'll still wear our masks in indoor spaces. And then once we all get vaccinated, who wants to be vaccinated, then I think there's going to be a choice whether to wear masks or not. And what will I do? I will not wear masks because I don't mind getting colds over the winter during the year. My 87-year-old father, if there was community incidents in his state, which is in Utah, is higher, I will have him wear a mask inside to be away from other people. But once the mask mandate is released in Utah, which is actually next week, and I won't have my young children mask who are not at risk. So everyone has to sort of be stratified. But the problem is a mandate versus a recommendation. And I think that mask mandates will go away.
That sounds incredibly positive and optimistic.
It is all very positive.
I love it. I love it. What's interesting, we'll get into this also, is that we do have clients and probably people joining from other countries. That's obviously a different, potentially different.
Yes, definitely.
Kind of edging into the company side of this and some of our clients, and the question here from Sue, people are having things going on in the summer, or potentially at the end of that transitionary period. In your eyes as a medical professional, what should companies be doing to keep their clients safe? I mean, if you are a retailer and you have services in store, what would you do to, I guess, make sure people are safe, and then also make sure people feel safe?
I would still keep masks on, indoors for the employees, even if you're fully vaccinated, and anyone coming in, again, until the mask mandate is released in the state. So this would be true of every state. And I don't think that's going to happen until everyone who wants a vaccine can get a vaccine. Mm-hmm. And then after that, because the question I see is that if the state doesn't mandate a mask, can you still require a mask? You can, of course, because that is the difference between private companies and public spaces, is that a private company can do what they want. I mean, you have that discretion. That's why so many private companies or private schools, for example, like Duke University is mandating colleges, students to come back with vaccination in fall. So there is a difference what you can do in a private company versus a public space when mask mandates are released. And so you have every right to do that. I will say that I would base it on how low the cases are in your region. So for example, if the cases are as low as they are in Israel right now, which is about 4 in 100,000, it's so hard to be around someone who has COVID that you may not think it's worth the squeeze to mandate masks at your event. So you have to think about how low your cases are in your particular region when you decide what to do about mandates or not. And Michigan, I would not have something without masks right now at all. Right. To be fair, San Francisco is at a very low case rate, and we could probably be around each other without masks. But this is a conservative city, and they're likely not to release their mask mandate for a while. So it is, things are going to look so different by July and August. And that feels weird because it's April and that's so soon. But that's what was seen in Israel and the UK, that they were like all debating these same issues. And then they got to such low cases with going faster with their vaccination rate that some of these issues became moot. Like when you're very low cases, they can't mandate everyone to mask. They just, there's no need. And so just check in with yourselves in a month and a half or 2 months. It's pretty amazing where we're going to get to. That's how much vaccine supply we have. And that's what the models show. And I actually think what Governor Newsom did is a very prudent thing, is to have us look forward to something, which is on June 15th.
That's awesome. That's awesome. There's a question here from Rex. I had a very similar question about herd immunity. What exactly is herd immunity? How is it measured? And ultimately, do we have to get there to have it mostly normal, or whatever the new normal is?
That is a great question. And I always just like to show this one picture that I'm going to share with you, if I can, on the screen, that I had my assistant draw, that I know it's sheep, but it's pink. And so I like it. So here is an example of before. So all the pink sheep are not vaccinated, or they didn't have natural infection. And then with more and more time that people get vaccinated, there are more and more pink sheep in the field. And because vaccinated people can't actually transmit to others, we have so much more data now since the clinical trials that show us that. And unvaccinated people can transmit, but the unvaccinated people are less likely to stand next to each other in this field that's full of pink sheep. And because of that, the virus literally is bopping around and it can't find people to infect. And after a while, it just goes down and the cases get really low. And what is herd immunity, or are we going to get there? Well, herd immunity is the idea that your cases have gotten supremely low. Doesn't mean zero. It never needs to mean zero. Actually, we have herd immunity with measles, but we will see people get measles occasionally. So it doesn't need to be zero, but that the cases are so low because so many of us are immune. And do I think we're going to get there? Yes, I actually do. And I don't believe I wouldn't believe the modeling that tells us that we're not. And why do I think so? Because you can't actually tell from a lab study or like a model what number is required to get you to herd immunity. You actually need to look at the effectiveness of the vaccine, which is profoundly high, way higher than we thought it would be, incredible. And you need to look at what's going on in the places that are ahead of you. So let's look at the places that are ahead of us. And that is Israel and UK. It's that simple. And they have very, very low cases, and they have not vaccinated 80% of their populations. As I told you, Israel has 60 first dose and UK has 50 first dose, and they're still extremely low with their cases. And at the same time, they're opening up, because you also need people to open up. You can't have them in lockdown and then say that's not the reason that cases are low. So they are opening up, Israel more than the UK, but the UK just opened up yesterday with a lot more activities, including 10,000 people can be outside together, for example, in large kind of sporting events. And so when I see that Israel got down to such low cases at 60%, and they're so much more open, I'm actually thinking we're going to get to herd immunity by 65 to 70. And that is profoundly achievable, because even with people who don't want the vaccine, okay, cut out some people who won't get the vaccine, even with the 0 to 11-year-olds who are not going to be approved for the vaccine for a while, they're only 14.5% of our population. 86.5% of us in the US are above the age of 11. And the EUA for the Pfizer vaccine is going down to 12 to 15. They've just filed. I just think there's going to be enough. I know there's some people who don't want the vaccine, but I also think that as more and more people get the vaccine, they may become less hesitant and they'll see the safety of it. And I just think if we had to get to like 85 or 90, I'd be worried, but I don't think we're going to get to 85 or 90.
Yeah, no, super interesting. What about variants? I know there's a lot floating around. The one that I've heard is the most mysterious is potentially the Brazilian variant. How does that play into any of this?
You know, I think the variant story has been really overblown, and I'm also seeing a little bit of the media not wanting to just give us the good news about how great these vaccines are, and I'm not sure why. And I'm really serious. It's really surprising me. There are three things about a variant, which is having some point mutations along the spike protein that would worry you. One is increased transmissibility. Second is increased virulence. Or more severe disease. And the third, God forbid, that they would evade our vaccines. So let's start with transmissibility. I think the B117, which is the UK variant, is more transmissible. That's the only one that's actually probably has the most data behind it, that you have higher viral loads and that it can spread faster. I think that that's contributing to what's going on in Michigan because it's spreading faster and they haven't gotten to vaccines fast enough. However, if you get to vaccines fast enough, like the UK and Israel did when they had 90% of their virus in the UK being B117 and 80% of the virus in Israel being B117, if you get out your vaccine fast, you can crush it. You can, and so can masks and distancing and ventilation. So you can actually get past the transmissibility question if you get out vaccine fast enough. We have to move fast enough. I actually think we should go to 1 dose first and delay the second dose in this country, which a lot more people are talking about. Second is increased virulence. Well, no, I don't think any of them have increased virulence. And in fact, the two papers were just published yesterday in the Lancet, one in Lancet Public Health, one in Lancet Infectious Disease, that showed that the B117 is not more virulent, does not create more severe disease. And the best place to have looked at that is in England. These are two very well done studies, and they both got released yesterday. I hope they get a lot of attention, that show that there's not more severe disease with the B117. Third, do they evade our vaccines? It's this simple. Stop talking about antibodies. That is just one arm of our immune system. It's a very minor arm of how we are going to get through this pandemic. And the antibodies are not the main way we fight viruses. The main way we fight viruses is something we don't talk about enough, which is our other arm of the immune system called cell-mediated or T-cell immunity. Why don't we talk about it very much right now? And the newspaper isn't talking about it very much right now, because it's actually hard to measure T cells. You need super high fancy machines, flow cytometry. Not a lot of groups are doing it. And antibodies are a dime a dozen, and you can measure them, and there's paper after paper. However, T cells, and any paper that's well done that's looked at our T cell immunity against all variants, P1 included, B117, B1351, the South Africa variant, our T cells are that we get to vaccines have a strong and robust immunity that is unfazed by the variant. So this is a story right now that's going on. It is not real. T cell immunity is real. It matters. It's what's going to give us longer term immunity. Dr. Fauci messaged this, and I think it got drowned out a little bit in the White House task force meeting 2 weeks ago from tomorrow, on a Wednesday, that he messaged this paper from NIAID about this from his organization. And T cells are going to work against our variants, and thus I am not worried about the variants.
Cool. It's great. It's wonderful to hear also.
But we have to get the vaccines out. I mean, it's just
Right.
nothing. I mean, even we are not as safe, we are only as safe as the world is safe. And so after we've gotten this population vaccinated, which is the United States, I hope President Biden does turn his attention to figuring out how to get vaccine out to the rest of the world better, because that will help the US to get the pandemic crushed worldwide.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's a question from Lauren. What should brands take into consideration when reopening? So we have a lot of brands that are already reopening. And then also, what about if guests don't follow policies? I guess this could be wearing masks during a mask mandate, or even post-mask mandate if a company chooses to request it. How do you think about that kind of company and consumer interaction?
I think that is difficult. We sort of face, in a way, healthcare worker settings have been open since the very beginning, meaning, we never didn't go to work. We had to, and we didn't actually have a problem, even when there was no vaccines, asking people to wear masks or distance or have that window open. And so I'm hoping that you will not have that problem where people at the beginning, before everyone can get vaccinated, who doesn't want to vaccinate, decline to mask. It is possible that a customer would, though, decline to mask. And I would just let it go, in the sense that we are all getting so much more immunity. We're vaccinated with a lot of people masking around you. You don't need, just like you don't need 100% vaccine efficacy, you don't need 100% masking. And I personally think that yelling and making a scene is just, I would just if I were a company and we've let this go with like customers, patients in our setting, we just let it go. We're just like, okay. And we asked, politely to pull the mask up, and if they decline, we let it go. We're not an airplane, actually, and that's a very constrained environment. Now, vaccination passports, or you requiring vaccination as a company, this is going to be a big deal. There's a difference between the public and private sphere. And what I mean by that is that what they've decided in Israel is that companies had every right to do it. So a restaurant had every right to say, you need to show me that you've been vaccinated to come in here. Restaurant is a private industry, so are companies. So Salesforce and Facebook is one of the first two companies that are saying they're going to go back to work in San Francisco. Didn't mandate vaccines, but they did say there's like a vaccinated section, there's an unvaccinated section. And what they said is that when you're vaccinated, you get to be less distance. And if you're going to come back as unvaccinated, you're going to have more distancing. And that's what the state said about sporting events. So the state of California said, when we open outdoor sporting events, there's going to be the vaccinated section and you can be shoulder to shoulder. And there's going to be the unvaccinated section and you have to be in your pods and you have to space out from each other. So there is going to be creative ways that you decide. I do think, and I know IBM, I think contacted me, or there was another company that contacted me that used Blue Shield that say they are going to mandate vaccinations for their workers unless you have a medical or religious reason. Yeah. And I do think that just like private universities, you have the right to do that. You have the right to say, I would like employees to be vaccinated before they come back. And I think that, again, that's a different than what you can do as opposed to what a public space can do.
Right. That's really interesting. I'm thinking about the baseball game, having the unvaccinated section back. That almost, per our conversation about herd immunity, that actually sounds like it's a bad call. Because
they are, that's a good question. They are going to say, that everyone's actually still keeping on their masks. And the unvaccinated are not shoulder to shoulder. They are, they have to stay in little pods of like who they came with.
Got it.
And they're going to be distant. So it's a way to keep the sheep away from each other.
That makes sense. We only have like 6 minutes left. I've got a few more questions, but if anybody in the audience has a couple more questions as well, we will try to get to them. There was one question in relation to games about your work with the 49ers. How are you helping the San Francisco 49ers in preparations for bringing games back?
We just had a webinar right before this with the 49ers, and we talked a lot about all these questions that you are all asking me now. And we are likely, the 49ers are likely not to require testing, because actually the problem with testing is if you've been vaccinated, like I just told you, I wouldn't require vaccination post-testing after vaccination unless you're symptomatic. You're not only gonna pick up you're going to create anxiety, because after vaccination, your viral load, if you've been exposed, is so low in your nose. But our PCR tests are so sensitive that they're going to say, yes, that you, quote, have COVID, even when your viral load's so low in your nose, you can't pass it on to others. It's going to create anxiety. We're quarantined. I would not recommend that. So we are recommending against testing fans to come back to the stadium who are vaccinated. And it's exactly what the state recommended, is that there's going to be likely vaccinated and unvaccinated. One issue with that is people have been buying vaccination cards off the internet, apparently. And that's why I think masking is going to be required for a little longer until our cases are very low. And it's going to be about kind of an unvaccinated and a vaccinated sections. And again, if our cases are profoundly low by August and the football season is not until later, it's possible this is all going to be moot, because when you still test and you see cases extremely low, exactly what's happening in Israel, they are testing, they haven't stopped testing, they are testing, and their cases are so low, you almost you breathe a sigh of relief and you start opening. And I am this optimistic about the vaccines that's what it's going to feel like in August. Really, like the conversations we're having in April are going to almost seem funny when we realize what's going to happen in August. I really believe that.
Yeah, super interesting. Everything's changing so fast. This is a question from Doris that was pre-submitted. The CDC says soap and water for cleaning surfaces, but sanitizer evaporates for quicker turnaround. We didn't touch much about this, about the actual spread of COVID-19 as far as surfaces, cleaning. Curious your thoughts and how that's going to look moving forward.
It's not spread by surfaces. And I wish that the CDC has come down even harder on that, has been more clear about that just in the last couple of days. It really, all this mass disinfection has been, I think, a waste of money, time, anxiety, and has also led to probably antimicrobial resistance. So I really think that we need to stop with all of this, what we call pandemic theater. And it really isn't, the way I would put it is that 100 people would have to sneeze on a surface and then you'd have to lick it to get COVID. So it's you just can't get it from surfaces. So it is, we've been talking about our schools about this, all this deep disinfection. I think we've known for a long time now, it's a respiratory spread virus. It's the mouth and nose. It's covering that mouth and nose before we get vaccines, and even after, until we can all get a vaccine. It's about masks, distancing, ventilation. Those are the three things.
It's big. There's a question from Shireen, but it's something that we've thought about too. How will slower rollout of the vaccine globally affect us here in the US or Israel or the UK?
Yes, this is the problem, is that that not all places have access to vaccine. And of course it will affect us, meaning we will be protected if we go and travel. In India, for example, who's having increasing cases, because we are vaccinated. But when people travel here, now, again, if we're vaccinated and we've reached herd immunity here, it's not that you're not going to be protected as a vaccinated person against a strain that's introduced here, but it may introduce cases in your community. If again, there have been people who've declined vaccination in this country, then they get infected and then there'll be more cases. It is tremendously important for us in the setting of a global public health emergency to realize that we are as safe as everyone else is safe. And unlike any other time in history, I would encourage the US and every country that has the means to sign on to what's called the COVID Technology Access Pool by the WHO, which has said that let countries make vaccine in country with even the formula for these mRNA vaccines, because to get more of their population vaccinated, because it will get us there faster. And so there's a lot of debate. And I do think, and I really believe this, I think that under this administration, the Biden administration will turn to vaccine equity more. They have signed on to something called COVAX, but that isn't likely to get us there as fast as the technology access pool, as soon as they get through American vaccinations. And he's focusing on US vaccinations first, but I think that the global administration is going to turn towards more vaccine equity worldwide. There are also companies worldwide that are making their vaccine for cheaper, like AstraZeneca. Hopefully Johnson & Johnson can get back on track, and that will make, because it is cheaper actually to make Johnson & Johnson. The Sputnik vaccine in Russia is actually, they're selling it for $3 to $4 a dose. The two Chinese vaccines, Sinopharm and Sinovac, there's been some doubts that they're not as great. And so I had to really see the data on those about their efficacy before saying that the world should get these vaccines. There's one called Covaxin, which is made by Bharat Pharmaceuticals in India. And as soon as they get it out to their population, they said they're going to sell it to the world. So there are other places in the world that are selling cheaper vaccine. I think the US could help that effort, and I hope we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. We are out of time, but I'd love to I'll end with just a single question of like, what would your recommendation be to a brand? Any like parting wisdom if you were a large retailer or global company? How could you potentially help make your consumers feel more comfortable and be a part of this transition phase?
You know, if I were a brand or a company, I would talk endlessly about how these vaccines were beyond our wildest dreams, and they're our only ticket back to normal 2019 pre-pandemic hugging all over each other life. And so anything you can do to message, the optimism about vaccines, and get your employees and vaccinated, and do public health campaigns about getting other people vaccinated. They're safe, they're amazing, they're beyond our wildest dreams, and we want to go back to normal. Life sucks.
Yeah, absolutely. And in our previous conversation, you mentioned the Roaring '20s and how that came after a devastating pandemic. So.
It's true. In 1918, it wasn't just World War I. There are history books that says after you've been like closed off from each other, people went crazy being around each other. And that's what's going to happen to us if we can get enough people vaccinated, which we will.
Awesome. Dr. Gandhi, thank you so much. Welcome to the Roaring '20s. Hope to meet you one day in person. Thank you to everybody who's come and joined. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patrick. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.